The following teaching is possible thanks to the friends and partners of Spirit and Truth Fellowship International.
We're at the high place at the city of Dan. We're at the place where Jeroboam's golden calf would have been set, and I want to talk about that in a little bit. But in this particular teaching, I want to talk about this area here, which was a Canaanite city called Laish originally. Now, when I lived here in 1977, this area archaeologically was called Area T. Now, I was about 500 yards in that direction in a place called Area Y, and I was excavating the wall. We had my good friend Mary Stewart was excavating this area. At that time in 1977, the excavation was just barely down under this rock. It was about where, Marty, about where you're sitting, about that level is all they had gone down. This area down here had not been uncovered yet. So we were still just digging down into this area and still finding part of the pottery. That pavement you see out the door there is from the time of Ahab. And that pavement, we had just basically uncovered that. Now look, you know, I mean, when you're looking at that pavement, people 800 years before Christ walked in and out on that pavement. We'll be seeing a lot of that at Dan while we're here. But let's talk about the city in general. In order to talk about the city, we've got to go to Judges chapter 18. So let's go to Judges 18. And in Judges 18, verse 1, here's what we read. In those days, Israel had no king. And in those days, the tribe of the Danites was seeking a place of their own where they might settle, because they had not yet come into an inheritance among the tribes of Israel. They were, you know, it sounds like, oh, the poor Danites. They just hadn't gotten an inheritance of their own. They just didn't know where they could settle. Well, what a bunch of junk. I mean, if you want to know what the real situation is, you got to go to Joshua. So let's go to Joshua. We'll go to Joshua chapter 20. There we go. And in Joshua chapter 20, we read about the inheritance of the Danites. Oh, I guess I said 20. It needs to be 19. Joshua 19. It says, the seventh lot came out for the tribe of Dan, clan by clan. The territory of their inheritance included Zorah, Eshtaol, Shemesh. By the way, Shemesh is Beth Shemesh. Now, we'll be there later on the tour. Same town, different name. Beth Shemesh. And it lists all these towns here. Verse 47, watch this. But the Danites had difficulty taking possession of their territory. They had difficulty. Doesn't tell us why here. So they went up and attacked Leshem. Leshem was one of the names in the Bible for the Canaanite town of Laish, and this town was Canaanite before it was Israelite. At the time Joshua crossed the Jordan River, and after he divided the land up to the tribes, of course, the Canaanites were still living in the land, and the Canaanites who had this city, they called it Leshem or Laish. By the way, this is one of the larger cities in Israel, had a beautiful water source, as you saw. The tell, or the top of the mound, is 50 acres. So that gives you an idea of the size of the place. Now we need to go to Judges, please. Let's see if we can find some more detail. Judges chapter 1. Joshua Judges chapter 1. In verse 34. You see, the Danites were given a tribal area that was to the east of where the Benjamites were, and just north of the tribe of Judah. So it was down, if you think about where Jerusalem is, and then you go west toward the sunset. In that area right there is where the Danites were given by Joshua. But why didn't they settle there? Well, gosh, Joshua tells us they had trouble. What's Judges tell us? Verse 34, the Amorites confined the Danites to the hill country, not allowing them to come down into the plain. And the Amorites were determined also to hold out in Mount Heres, Ajalon, and Shaalbim. But when the power of the house of Joseph increased, they too were pressed into forced labor. So in other words, it says the Amorites were determined to hang on to their land. You know, life is a faith battle. Now Joshua gave the land west of Jerusalem in that area to the Danites. But the Amorites were determined to be there. Well, what should the Danites have been?
More determined.
Yeah, they should have been trusting God. They should have been more determined. They should have said, wait a minute, this is ours. And they should have taken it. But having a helicopter here, we need to hold on for... Okay, so now let's go back to Judges chapter 18. And so we find now, what did the Danites do when they couldn't conquer their own land because of lack of faith? Well, in verse 1 of 18 it says, in those days Israel had no king, and in those days the tribe of the Danites were seeking a place of their own where they might settle, because they had not yet come into an inheritance among the tribes of Israel, because they had trouble, because they had no faith, because they didn't trust in God. And you know, it's interesting, but if you don't trust God in your life, you know, you may end up with things, but they end up being second best. We see here how close Dan is to to Lebanon. You can practically touch it. Well, you know, through history, you'd think, gosh, this is a great place. But historically in Israel, this place got hit first by every army. When the Syrians came through, whap. When the Assyrians came through, whap. When the Persians came through, whap. The Babylonians come through, whap. The Greeks come through, whap. You know, so these guys get pounded. And you know, all through the Kings, you talk about, you know, the Syrians make incursions into Israel. Well, guess where they're incurring into? Into this area first. So the Danites took the easy way out back at the time of Joshua, but then their descendants got pounded because of it for generations and generations. Anyway, verse 2, so the Danites sent 5 warriors from Zorah and Eshtaol, and you will recognize that from the Samson record. Samson was one of the Danites who said, no, this is the land Joshua gave us and we're going to stay here. So there were some Danites in the original territory still allotted to Dan. Samson was one of those. But the Danites sent 5 warriors from Zorah and Eshtaol to spy out the land and explore it. These men represented all their clans. They told them, go explore the land. The men entered the hill country of Ephraim, that's way below us, came to the house of Micah, where they spent the night. When they were near Micah's house, they recognized the voice of the young Levite. Again, the various clans had different accents, just like we have different accents in the way we speak. So they turned in there and asked him, who brought you here? What are you doing in this place? Why are you here? He told them what Micah had done for him. Now, Micah was a guy, and to find out about Micah, you have to read chapter 17. And the man named Micah was a guy who he stole silver from his own mother and made an idol with it. And when he found this Levite, he said, oh, I want you to be my priest. And so he hired this Levite to be a priest to an idol. What's that tell you about the Levite? I mean, he's not very solid on the scripture. Now the Danites are walking through the country, and they hear the voice of the Levite, and they say, whoa, what are you doing here? And he says, well, you know, this guy Micah, he's hired me to be his priest. Verse 4, he told them what Micah had done for him, and he said, he's hired me, and I am his priest. Verse 5, then they said to him, please inquire of God to learn whether our journey will be successful. The priest answered them, go in peace, your journey has the Lord's approval. So the 5 men left and came to Laish. They came to this area. They were supposed to be down taking the area of Dan, but instead they're way up here in the north. The 5 men came to this town. Now this is the beginning of the Judges period. I know that this record occurs at the end of the book of Judges. but chronologically it's been displaced. You know, the book of Judges, when you hit chapter 17, it's no longer in chronological order. This record occurred in the book of Judges. So we're talking about an event that's maybe 1,350 years before Christ, somewhere right in there. So he said, the 5 men came to Laish, where they saw that the people were living in safety. So 3,300 years ago, something like that, these 5 Israelites came marching in the front gate of the Canaanite city. It says that the Canaanites were living in safety, like the Sidonians, unsuspecting and secure. And since their land lacked nothing, they were prosperous. Also, they lived a long way from the Sidonians and had no relationship with anyone else. If they don't have a relationship with anybody and they live a long way from Sidon, what's that tell you?
No help in time of battle.
Right, no help in time of battle, exactly. Looks like, gee, we can pick on this one small town and catch it, get it, and that can be our town. So verse 8, when they returned to Zorah and Eshtaol, their brothers asked them, how'd you find things? They answered, come on, let's attack them. We've seen that the land is very good. And we walked through some of the land. It's gorgeous up here. Do you see all the fig trees and all the lush vegetation, the water? They said, this is great. This is much better than what God gave us. Jeez. They said, we've seen the land is very good. Aren't you going to do something? Don't hesitate to go there and take it over. When you get there, you'll find an unsuspecting people and a spacious land that God has put into your hands, a land that lacks nothing whatever. Verse 11, then 600 men from the clan of the Danites, armed for battle, set out from Zorah and Eshtaol. On their way, they set up camp near Kiriath Jearim in Judah. This is why the place west of Kiriath Jearim is called Mahaneh Dan. And Mahaneh in Hebrew means camp. So it's called the camp of Dan. To this day, from there they went on to the hill country of Ephraim and came to Micah's house. Now remember, Micah's the guy that hired the Levite priest, stole the money from his mom, made the idol. The Levite is worshiping this idol. Came to Micah's house. Then 5 men who had spied out the land of Laish said to their brothers, do you know that one of these houses has an ephod and other household gods, a carved image and a cast idol? Whoa, those things are cool. This is like one generation after Moses. You know, I mean, to be very, I mean, maybe 2, but I mean, Josh was just barely dead. You know, if he may have even been dead yet. He may just have been very old. And yet, these guys are all excited about, what was it? They household gods, a carved image, a cast idols. And I love this. He says, now you know what to do. And they go, you're right, we'll go steal it. That's what we should do. Is the King James, do whatever your hand finds to do? How's the King James translate that?
Consider what ye have to do.
Yeah, now consider what you have to do. You know, now you know what to do, go do it. So they turned in there and went, so you know what they should have done if they were really with the Lord, is they would have gone to that place and broken all those idols like the law said to do. But instead they go and steal them. Jeez. Verse 15, so they turned in there, went to the house of the young Levite at Micah's place and greeted him. The 600 Danites armed for battle stood at the entrance to the gate. The 5 men who'd spied out the land went inside and took the carved image, the ephod, the other household gods, and the cast idol, while the priests and the 600 armed men stood at the entrance to the gate. When these men went into Micah's house and took the carved image, the ephod, the other household gods, and the cast idols, the priest said to them, what are you doing? Oh, praise the Lord. I mean, at least he'd ask. You know, yo, hey. I mean, these guys just come barging in the door and start taking stuff. Yo, what are you doing? So watch what happens here, verse 19. They answered him, shh, quiet, you'll wake everybody up. Shh, be quiet, don't say a word. Come with us and be our father and priest. Isn't it better that you serve a tribe and a clan and Israel is a priest, rather than just this guy's house? Hey, we're offering you the opportunity of a lifetime. You get to serve a whole tribe rather than just this one house. So we'll just take these gods and take you and kind of leave and everybody will be fine. I mean, man, does this like speak to your heart about corruption, ungodliness? Wow. Verse 22, then verse 21, putting their little children, their livestock, and their possessions in front of them. Oh wait, verse 20, I guess. Then the priest was glad. He thought that was great. He took the ephod, the other household gods, and the carved image, and went along with the people. You know, where's the integrity of this guy? Instead of saying, you know, excuse me, you know, it's bad enough we have idols, but now we're stealing them. You know, but putting their little children, their livestock, their possessions in front of them, they turned away and left. When they had gone some distance from Micah's house, the men who lived near Micah were called together and overtook the Danites. As they shouted after them, the Danites turned and said to Micah, "What's the matter with you, that you called out your men to fight? What's the matter with you?" Verse 24, he replied, "What's the matter? You took the gods I made and my priest and went away. What else do I have? How can you ask what's the matter with you?" You know, here's this Israelite saying, "You stole my idol gods and my priest to my idol gods, and you say, what's the matter?" What he ought to be saying is, "Bless God, I've been given an opportunity to clear up my estate." but it's very powerful. I mean, do you see how fast in people's hearts they turn away from God? You know, and people pick up superstitions that quickly, and idol gods or lucky hats or lucky coins or whatever. He says, you know, "You took everything I have. How can you ask what's the matter with you?" The Danites answered, verse 25, "Don't argue with us, or some hot-tempered men will attack you, and you and your family will lose your lives." So the Danites went their way, and Micah, seeing that they were too strong for him, turned around and went back home, which was at least an intelligent thing to do. Then they took what Micah had made and his priests and went on to Laish against the peaceful and unsuspecting people. They attacked them with the sword and burned down their city. So when you come to this city and you're digging down and you find the Israelite city, and then you find an ash layer, and then what are you going to find underneath that? The Canaanite city. And that's when you use the Bible as historical records, this is some of the stuff you look for. Whenever the Bible gives you the history, you can look for things. So you're going to look for Israelite stuff on top of an ash layer on top of Canaanite stuff. That's what you would look for to find this occupation layer. And archaeology is interesting. Like, for example, you see these stones here. Well, this particular set of stones right here, it's interesting, it's Roman. Now, what is fascinating about this is the stone we've been able to determine is Israelite. How do we know the building is Roman? This is called a stretcher header construction. Do you see this? Stretch, head, see that? This is called the stretcher header construction. And when we looked at the way this particular wall, this particular piece of the wall was made, it was more Roman in its construction. The Israelites used a stretcher header construction, but not exactly like this. They used a different stretcher header construction. Well, let me ask you a question. If you came to a town and it had all these neat squared off stones sitting around, would you want to use them, or would you just bury them? No, you'd use them. So it's not good enough that you just simply have an indication in the rock from what layer it comes from. You look at the actual way things are built, the way the walls are built, what's used as filler. Are there any coins between the rocks that would give you a time period? The way the corners are set, the way the cornerstones are set, and all these things will give you clues as to who it was that built the wall. Because the rocks themselves can be from much earlier, but then the stones will be used over and over again by different civilizations. So they burned Laish, and archaeologically then you would look for that ash layer. Verse 28, there was no one to rescue them because they lived a long way from Sidon and had no relationship with anyone else. The city was in a valley near Beth Rehob. Okay, we looked down off Nimrod's castle in Mount Hermon down to Dan. Are we in a valley right now? Yep. Absolutely. There's Mount Hermon right to our east. There's the Anti-Lebanon right to our west. Mountains over there, mountains over here. Where are we? Gosh, we're in a valley. Amazing. Just like it says here. This is great. The city was in a valley near Beth Rehob. The Danites rebuilt the city after they burned down the Canaanite city. Then they stomp everything down, they rebuild the city, and they settled there. They named it Dan after their forefather Dan, who was born to Israel, though the city used to be called Laish. There the Danites set up for themselves the idols, Jonathan, son of Gershom, son of who? Son of Moses. Now, it's interesting, and his son were priests for the tribe of Dan until the time of the captivity of the land. Steve, you've obviously got a King James version. Would you read that verse in the King James?
Verse 30.
Yeah, verse 30, really loud.
And the children of Dan set up the graven image, and Jonathan, the son of Gershom, the son of Manasseh, he and his sons were priests to the tribe of Dan until the day of the captivity of the land.
Right, so the King James Version says, Jonathan, son of Gershom, the son of Manasseh. My version reads, Jonathan, son of Gershom, son of Moses. What's going on here? Why is there a discrepancy? You see, the scribes who were in charge of the text were so embarrassed that a grandson of Moses would be the one that set up the idolatrous practices here in Dan. I mean, when you think about that, you've got Jonathan, son of Gershom, son of Moses. I mean, this is the grandson of Moses. And he's the guy that came here with all the idols and started the idolatrous worship. And the scribes were so embarrassed about that they changed the word Moshe to Manasseh. But when they did that, because of their respect of the text, in a little marginal note in the Hebrew, they wrote that they did, so that succeeding generations would see that. Now here you come as a translator. Now what do? Do you translate the Hebrew text as the scribes have altered it, or do you translate the Hebrew text as you know it was originally given? And then translators aren't sure what to do. You see, you've got the Hebrew text right in front of you that reads one way, but you know that it's wrong. You've got the note on the Hebrew text which tells you how it should read, and what do you do? And so various translators have different theologies or different theories about translation. The King James people just said, well, we'll translate the Hebrew text literally, and we'll let Bible teachers and commentators explain the truth. What's the problem with that?
Bible teachers and commentators may not do it.
Right. Bible teachers and commentators may not teach the truth, or they may not, worse, they may not even know the truth. Right. Exactly. The problem, of course, with translating it Moses is that you're not seeing the change in the Hebrew text. So there's advantages to doing it both ways. What's interesting to me is the desire early on in the Hebrew tradition to protect the name of Moses. And the other side of the coin is look how fast even what would be considered the best, the top echelon, the cream of the crop of the Levites went downhill. It's just amazing. So this is how the tribe of Dan, if you want to know how the tribe of Dan got to be here, how did they come to be here in Dan when they were given a tribal area that was just to the west of that of the Benjamites. That's how they got to be here. They didn't have the faith to take, and by the way, does the reason for that lack of faith show up now? They didn't have the faith to kick the Amorites out of the valley. Well, gee, they were all idolaters. They were thieves. I mean, they weren't godly people. So guess what? If you're not going to live godly, it's tough to put together faith, and it's tough to get God to work on your behalf, because God supports the godly. He gives grace unto the humble, but he stands against the proud. So that would, if you understand, if you put this record together with why they couldn't take their own inheritance, then it makes sense. And like I say, there were bad ramifications from this. For one thing, obviously, the idolatry in Dan never stopped. In the next teaching, we're going to take a small break, then we're going to come back. I want to teach about Jeroboam and how this high place got to be the high place. And it's a very important teaching, but you've got, why would this area, why would Dan even accept that? The idolatry in Dan never stopped. There was always idolatry here. And also the fact that, it just was a second best decision because the people here just got pounded from the armies of the north. Even, by the way, like they do today. I mean, when this area still gets rocketed, still gets shelled, you know, and that type of thing, because it's close to the northern border and the enemies of Israel. If there's a lesson here, I think we can see that if you're living ungodly, if you're stealing, if you're lying, if you're into idolatry, it's hard to accomplish the tasks that God gives you. He's just not going to work as powerfully to make sure that his work gets done.